To be honest, I'm going to get plenty of criticism over my lifetime, and it's something that I don't completely ignore.
On a stormy afternoon at Windsor Castle, a moment unfolded that would change the course of royal history forever. Queen Camilla, usually the picture of composure, was brought to tears by a final wish from King Charles, a wish that shattered decades of expectations and revealed the true heart behind the crown. What was this wish, and why did it move Camilla so deeply? Join us as we uncover the unforgettable day, the day Windsor Castle witnessed history. That Tuesday afternoon at Windsor Castle, rain pounded hard against the ancient windows, setting a heavy tone inside. Queen Camilla sat quietly in the drawing room, unaware that in just 17 minutes, her life was about to change forever. Suddenly, Princess's Land Rover roared to the castle gates, tires splashing water everywhere. Everyone froze. When the Princess Royal drives like that, you know something serious is happening, something that could alter the future of the monarchy itself. What happened next was so devastating, so utterly unexpected, that a woman who'd survived decades of being Britain's most hated person was reduced to sobbing uncontrollably. Picture this. The Queen Consort, usually composed of marble, clutching her handkerchief so tightly her knuckles turned white, tears streaming down her face as princess, and delivered news that would rewrite royal history. The conversation lasted just 20 minutes. 20 minutes that undid 20 years of careful planning. 20 minutes that transformed a queen into a woman, watching her dreams crumble. Staff members passing the door heard something they'd never forget, the sound of Camilla whispering the same broken phrase over and over. He waited his whole life. But what message could possibly break someone who'd endured death threats, public humiliation, and being branded a homewrecker? What words could shatter the iron resolve of a woman who'd fought tooth and nail for acceptance? The answer was about to shake the very foundations of a 1,000-year-old institution when death knocked on Buckingham Palace. Here's what the palace never wanted you to know. While the world saw carefully staged photos and reassuring statements, King Charles was fighting a battle that would make Game of Thrones look like a tea party. Early 2024 hit like a sledgehammer. First came the announcement that sent shockwaves across the Commonwealth. The king had cancer, not just any king, but the man who'd waited longer than any heir in British history to wear the crown. 76 years old, barely 2 years into his reign, and suddenly mortality wasn't just knocking at the door, it was kicking it down. But the real story, the one they desperately try to hide, it was far more brutal than anyone imagined. Picture this. A king meant to be the embodiment of strength and continuity, gripping his desk until his knuckles went white, trying to hide the tremors in his hands as he signed state documents. Weekly hospital visits that left him so drained, staff would find him asleep at his desk, still clutching his pen. One insider revealed something that'll haunt you. During a particularly harsh treatment week, His Majesty was reviewing urgent papers when his hand just gave out. The pen dropped. For a moment, he just stared at it on the floor. That's when we all realized this wasn't just about a king fighting cancer. This was about a man confronting his own mortality while an entire nation watched. Queen Camilla became his shadow, rearranging her entire existence around treatment schedules. She'd sit through 6-hour chemotherapy sessions, holding his hand, reading him updates from his grandchildren, trying to keep his spirits up while her own heart was breaking. Staff noticed she'd started ordering stronger coffee, sleeping less, the worry lines around her eyes deepening like canyons. Then came the second blow, Princess Catherine's diagnosis. The future queen, mother of 3 young children, facing her own cancer battle. The monarchy wasn't just under threat, it was under siege. The very people meant to carry the institution forward were fighting for their lives. Behind closed doors, Charles began having conversations nobody expected. Conversations about legacy, about duty, about what happens when the unstoppable force of royal obligation meets the immovable object of human frailty. What came next was a decision so radical, it hadn't been seen in over 2 centuries. The conversation that changed everything. In the wood-paneled sanctuary of his Highgrove study, walls lined with his own watercolors and decades of family memories, King Charles was about to make the most shocking decision in modern royal history. For weeks, he'd been meeting secretly with one person. Princess Anne, not William, his heir, not Camilla, his wife, and the sister who'd shared his childhood, understood his burden and never sugarcoated the truth. She was the only one he trusted with what he was about to do. "I need William to step up," Charles told her during one late-night meeting, his voice steady despite the magnitude of his words. "Not when I'm gone. Now, while I can still guide him, while I can still ensure the transition is smooth." Anne's response? Dead silence. Then, "Charles, do you understand what you're suggesting? This hasn't been done since George III, and he was mad." "Yes, I know," Charles interrupted. "But I'm not mad, and I'm dying. And I'd rather hand over a thriving monarchy than leave William to inherit chaos." What Charles proposed was unprecedented in modern times, a voluntary regency. He would keep the title of king, but William would assume the actual powers and duties of the monarch. Think about that for a second. A man who'd waited 70 years to be king, voluntarily stepping aside while still alive and mentally capable. "The monarchy needs energy," Charles explained to his stunned sister. "It needs someone who can work 18-hour days, who can travel the world, who can connect with younger generations. I can barely make it through a state dinner without exhausting myself." This was an abdication. That would have been simpler. This was something far more complex, requiring constitutional experts to dust off precedents from the 1800s. It was a solution that would allow Charles to retain his dignity while ensuring the monarchy's survival. And, ever practical, asked the crucial question, "What about Camilla?" Charles's face changed. For the first time in their conversation, the king looked genuinely pained. "She'll understand," he said quietly. "She has to." But as in left Highgrove that night, she knew the truth. Camilla wouldn't just have to understand. She'd have to sacrifice everything she'd worked for. And that conversation couldn't wait. The queen who lost her crown. The rain was still pounding when Anne's car pulled up to Windsor Castle. She didn't wait for an umbrella, didn't pause for protocol. She marched straight to the private drawing room where Camilla sat reading letters, blissfully unaware her world was about to implode. "We need to talk," Anne said, closing the door behind her. No pleasantries, no small talk, just 4 words that made Camilla's blood run cold. What followed was 20 minutes of the most devastating conversation in recent royal history. Anne, with her characteristic directness, laid out Charles's decision. William would take over. Not eventually, not gradually, immediately. A lady-in-waiting who entered moments after and left found a scene she'll never forget. Camilla, the woman who'd faced down death threats and public hatred, sitting perfectly still, tears streaming down her face, her hand pressed to her mouth as if trying to hold back a scream. "He waited his whole life," Camilla whispered, her voice breaking. 70 years of waiting, and now when he finally has it, the tears weren't just about losing power. They were about watching the man she loved give up his life's dream, about seeing decades of her own sacrifice, the abuse she'd endured, the dignity she'd maintained, the careful rehabilitation of her image, suddenly rendered meaningless. In the days that followed, palace staff witnessed something heartbreaking. Camilla would stand in doorways of rooms she'd grown accustomed to using, as if memorizing them. She'd run her fingers along furniture, hold photographs a little too long, savoring moments she knew were numbered. One butler found her in the throne room at 3 a.m., just standing there, looking at the 2 chairs she and Charles had so briefly occupied together. "I suppose," she said quietly, not turning around, "I always knew it was borrowed time. But here's what made it even more painful." Camilla understood why Charles was doing it. She'd seen him struggle through treatments, watched him force himself through state dinners when he could barely stand. Love meant accepting his decision, even as it broke her heart. She could have fought it. One insider revealed, could have made it difficult, could have gone public, but that's not who she is. She loved him too much to make his final years a battlefield. Instead, Camilla did something nobody expected. She started preparing for her own obsolescence, the silent revolution. While Camilla grieved in private, something extraordinary was happening in the public eye, though most people missed it entirely. Prince William wasn't making grand speeches or demanding recognition. Instead, he was orchestrating the smoothest power transition in royal history, and he was doing it so quietly that even seasoned royal watchers almost missed it. It started small. William began appearing at events usually reserved for the monarch, not the glamorous ones. The boring constitutional meetings, the endless document signings, the tedious diplomatic briefings. Staff noticed he'd arrive at Buckingham Palace before dawn, leave after midnight. No fanfare, no press releases, just work. It was surreal. One palace employee admitted, one day he's Prince William. The next day, everyone's treating him like he's already king. The shift was so subtle but so complete. Even the way people bowed changed, deeper, more reverent. The really clever part? William made it look like he was just helping out while his father recovered. He'd chair meetings on the king's behalf, sign documents as requested by His Majesty, host dignitaries in support of the crown. Every action carefully framed to seem temporary, when in reality, it was anything but. Behind closed doors, the transformation was even more dramatic. William gained access to the red boxes, those sacred government documents only the monarch sees. He began holding weekly audiences with the Prime Minister. Intelligence briefings that used to go to Charles now went to William first. But here's what really showed his genius. William never once acted like he was taking over. In public, he constantly deferred to his father, praised the king's wisdom, spoke about following his guidance. It was a masterclass in assuming power without appearing to seize it. The British public, famous for their resistance to change, barely noticed. Polls showed approval rating for the monarchy actually increased. Younger people, who'd always seen William as more relatable, celebrated quietly. Older generations, who might have resisted, were soothed by the constant messaging that this was temporary, that Charles was still king. William understood something crucial, a constitutional expert explained. The British people don't like upheaval, so he gave them evolution disguised as stability. By the time they realized what had happened, it was already done. Even more impressive, William managed this while his wife was battling cancer. He'd leave Catherine's chemotherapy appointments and go straight to state functions, switching from devoted husband to quasi-monarch in the space of a car ride. The question everyone was asking, how long could this arrangement last? The answer would shock everyone. The crown's hidden casualty. 6 months into the new arrangement, the real cost became painfully clear. It wasn't Charles who was paying the highest price. Camilla's transformation was heartbreaking to watch. The woman who'd finally found her place in the royal family was slowly being erased from it. Her schedule, once packed with engagements, dwindled to a handful of carefully selected appearances. Her staff was reassigned. Her office was moved to a smaller wing of the palace. It was like watching someone fade away while still breathing. One former aide revealed she'd show up to events, smile for the cameras, stand dutifully beside Charles. But behind closed doors, she was disappearing. The most painful moments came during state functions. Camilla would enter rooms she'd once commanded, only to find herself seated further from the center of power. Conversations would halt when she approached, then resume about topics she was no longer privy to. She'd catch servants giving her pitying looks. The worst insult of all. One particularly brutal example. During a state banquet, Camilla found herself seated not beside Charles, but several places down, while William and Catherine occupied the positions of honor. She maintained perfect composure throughout the evening, but eagle-eyed observers noticed her hands trembling as she raised her glass for toasts. She never complained. A friend close to Camilla shared. Not once, but you could see it in her eyes. The realization that she'd gone from queen consort to glorified widow while her husband was still alive. The relationship between Camilla and William, never particularly warm, became arctic. They'd exchange required pleasantries, perform their public duties together when necessary, but the tension was palpable. William, focused on modernizing the monarchy, had little time for his stepmother's feelings. Camilla, stripped of influence, had no way to assert herself. But perhaps the cruelest cut came from an unexpected source. The public, the same people who'd finally accepted her as queen consort now, began to forget she existed. Media coverage shifted entirely to William and Catherine. Camilla's patronages received less attention. Her appearances generated fewer headlines. "I gave up everything," she reportedly told a close friend during a particularly dark moment. "My reputation, my privacy, my entire life. I thought I was building something lasting. Turns out I was just keeping the seat warm." Yet even in her diminishment, Camilla showed remarkable grace. She began mentoring Catherine quietly, sharing hard-won wisdom about surviving public scrutiny. She maintained her dignity at every appearance, never showing bitterness in public. Most remarkably, she continued to support Charles, even as his decision had effectively ended her relevance. "That's real love," one observer noted. "Watching the person you love choose duty over your happiness, and supporting them anyway." As the months passed, a new normal emerged, but nobody was prepared for what would happen next. The future arrives early. 1 year after that rainy Tuesday at Windsor Castle, the British monarchy looked completely different, and the transformation was staggering. William hadn't just assumed royal duties. He'd revolutionized them, gone with the stuffy protocols and endless ceremonial functions. In their place came a streamlined, modern monarchy that actually connected with people under 50. He held virtual town halls, showed up at food banks without media fanfare, and made climate change a central royal priority. It was like watching the monarchy fast forward 50 years overnight. One palace insider marveled. William did more to modernize the institution in 12 months than had been done in the previous century. Catherine, despite her health battles, emerged as the perfect modern queen-in-waiting. Her appearances, though limited by treatment, carried more weight than ever. She focused on early childhood development with laser precision, turning it from a nice charitable interest into a national priority backed by serious policy work. The public response was overwhelming. Approval ratings for the monarchy hit historic highs. Young people, who'd been increasingly Republican, suddenly saw the royal family as relevant. The institution Charles had feared was dying was suddenly thriving. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. Charles was happy about it. He'd watch William on television, conducting investitures or meeting world leaders, and just smile. An aide revealed. There was no jealousy, no regret, just pride. He'd given his son the gift of time. Time to establish himself, time to make mistakes while Charles was still there to guide him. The arrangement, supposedly temporary, began to feel permanent. Constitutional experts quietly drafted papers making the regency official. Parliament prepared legislation. The transition everyone thought would take years after Charles's death was happening smoothly while he was still alive to ensure its success. Charles, freed from the crushing daily duties of kingship, found unexpected peace. He spent more time on his environmental work, wrote letters to his grandchildren, and yes, continued his treatments with less stress. He looked younger, one friend observed, like a weight had been lifted. The royal family's public appearances became carefully choreographed displays of transition. Charles and William would appear together, but William would take the lead. The message was clear. The future had arrived with the past's blessing. International leaders began treating William as the de facto monarch. State visits were planned around his schedule. Foreign dignitaries sought audiences with him. The powerful figures who shaped world events had accepted what the British public was slowly realizing. The reign of King William V had begun in all but name. But in this new world order, what place was there for Camilla? The answer would prove both heartbreaking and surprisingly redemptive: the unexpected ending. 2 years after that fateful conversation at Windsor Castle, a photographer captured an image that would define this entire extraordinary chapter of royal history. It was during the state opening of Parliament, the most formal, tradition-bound ceremony in the British calendar. There sat Charles, still technically king, watching as William read the Queen's speech. Beside Charles, holding his hand with fierce devotion, was Camilla. Camera caught her at the perfect moment, tears in her eyes, but smiling. Not the tears of that terrible Tuesday, but something different: pride, acceptance, love. She finally understood, a family friend explained. This wasn't about her losing a crown. It was about Charles securing his legacy. He didn't want to be remembered as the king who held on too long. He wanted to be the king who put the monarchy's future first. The transformation was complete. William ruled in all but name, bringing energy and modernity to an institution that had been creaking under the weight of tradition. Catherine, her health improving, emerged as a powerful force for change. And Charles, freed from the burden of day-to-day kingship, became the elder statesman he was meant to be. But what about Camilla? In losing her position, she found something unexpected: freedom. No longer under the microscope of being queen consort, she could finally just be herself. She focused on her grandchildren, her reading charity, her garden. The woman who'd been vilified for decades finally found peace. "I see her sometimes at Windsor," one staff member shared. "She'll be reading in the garden or having tea with friends. She looks content, happier than when she was at the center of everything." The arrangement that shocked the world became a template for modern monarchy. Charles had done something revolutionary. He'd shown that passing the torch didn't require death or scandal. It could be done with grace, planning, and love. During a private family dinner, William reportedly told his father, "You gave me the greatest gift any king could give his heir: time to learn, time to grow, time to become ready." Charles's response? "I gave myself a gift too, the chance to see you succeed." But the most poignant moment came when Camilla, during a rare interview, was asked about that day at Windsor when she learned of Charles's decision. "Yes, I cried," she admitted, "but not for the reason people think. I cried because I realized how brave he was, how selfless. He gave up his dream to secure everyone else's future. How could I not love him more for that?" The monarchy had evolved, survived, and thrived. Charles got to see his son flourish as king. William got to establish himself with his father's guidance. And Camilla, she got to keep the only thing that truly mattered to her, the man she'd loved for 50 years. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on. It's knowing when to let go. Charles understood that. Eventually, so did Camilla. And in that understanding, they found something more precious than any crown. They found peace. The question now isn't whether Charles made the right decision. History has already answered that. The question is, would you have had the courage to do the same? To give up everything you'd waited for, everything you dreamed of for the greater good? That's the real legacy of King Charles III. Not the king who reigned the longest, but the king who knew when to step aside. And in doing so, he might just have saved the monarchy itself. What do you think? Was Charles right to make this unprecedented decision? Would William have been ready without this unique transition? And what about Camilla, victim or hero in this royal revolution? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from behind palace walls.